All right, hello, Metal Maniacs. It is the Meister from Brews and Tunes. Cheers. Very, very excited today. I am chatting with the one and only Mr. Jym Harris, of course, of the original and the mighty Emissary, as well as Sylent Storm. Jym, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing,
Yeah.
my friend?
Doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me. Victor, right?
Yes, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Cool.
Um, yeah, very excited to be chatting with you. I think one of the big things that happened in this past couple of years was the fact that this fantastic album was released.
Hey,
Yeah,
you got a
love it.
physical copy of it.
I do, and I love it. It's fantastic.
Thank you
And
so much.
yeah, and I would say anybody watching this, buy this if you don't have it. In fact, I'd say go on to Bandcamp. That's where I bought it, was Bandcamp, because not only did I get the physical album, but I got a download that included the original demos of the songs,
Sure.
which is incredible. And I love that. I love that kind of history of music and history of a song. I find really fascinating, and it's great to hear those original tracks from the late 80s, early 90s, and then to hear them now and how they've evolved a bit, and the production with today's production, and just
Right.
and how they've grown, and yeah, it's a phenomenal album. I It's one of those
Appreciate
albums
that.
that and I'm sure you have albums like this, but for me, this is an album, I put it on, I listen to it, and once it finishes, I immediately hit, repeat. I got to listen to that again. It's so good.
We've heard that, and there's something we did something kind of sneaky there. We sort of made the album a little bit short, so we wouldn't wear out our welcome. I mean, it clocks in just a little over half an hour, so it's
Mhm.
about like I don't know, the first Van Halen record's about that length, or
Right.
even like Rain and Blood is
Yeah.
Slayer's
Yeah.
Rain and Blood. The whole album's like a half an hour long.
Yeah.
It doesn't wear out its welcome, so you still kind of feel like, when it's over, you're not on the last, the end of the record going, man, really, there's three more songs to go, like where you're exhausted from it, because the album's, an hour and a half long, or whatever. So sort of kept it compact, four songs on each side, of the cassette vinyl, it's
Right.
eight songs total. So when it's over, then I think a lot of people feel like, yeah, that was a complete experience. And I have heard a lot of people go, I push play again,
Yeah.
start it over.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's such a great album. And I was really curious, kind of what was the catalyst? Why now? What changed? What happened for you to decide, hey, let's, get the original members back together. Let's re-record, or actually, put out an album of this material that we weren't able to do back in the day, back in the early 90s. Kind of what
Right.
what happened there? How did that start?
So, right around the time that the pandemic was hitting, I was playing in Silent Storm, and a couple of the former members of Emissary, they had an original project as well, doing a different style of music, and a lot of us hadn't talked in a long time. And because pandemic was hitting, Silent Storm was on hold kind of indefinitely. We didn't know how long that was going to last. Nobody knew when there was going to be a time when we were going to be able to play a show again, or we weren't going to have to wear masks,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. It was scary. So with that project idling, um, our original drummer hit us up and said, or maybe messaged me, and he messaged our guitar player and said, hey, I'm not doing anything. My band, his band was on hold. Maybe we should get back together and re-record those old demos. He's like, I've been listening to him. It's like a nostalgia thing. I just think that we could make them sound better. He's like, well, we've all got our own recording studio now, each of us, in our own homes. We could re-record that stuff and make it sound better. Um, while our projects were idling, we kind of had that idea, threw the idea out that we might do some re-recording of some of the old material. And there was this book being put together called Rusted Metal. Are you familiar with this?
I've heard of it. I don't have a copy myself, but
It's this huge coffee table book, and it's a history of the Pacific Northwest hard rock and heavy metal music scenes. And for a minute, I was playing in a band called Cruella from Portland, and we're from the band where I live, in Medford, Oregon, is 5 hours south of Portland. So we're kind of not really part of that scene, but we had played up there back in the 90s. One of the guys that owns Cruella's record label, Northwest Metalworks, was putting that book together, James Beach, and he messages me, and he'd always been hearing about Jimbo from Emissary, hearing my name and used with the band name Emissary. And he said, "Did Emissary ever play up here? Ever play in the Pacific Northwest? You ever play Seattle, Portland?" I was like, "Yeah, we went up there. We played up there a few times." He says, "Do you have any flyers or anything like that, or any old pictures?" Yeah, I think you guys might deserve a place in this book. I sent him some stuff, not knowing if we would get in the book, and the book comes out, and he puts a picture of us, Emissary, Southern Oregon, puts a bio and all this.
Oh,
Suddenly,
cool.
all these people online start talking about this old band, Emissary, that had these demos out in the early '90s. So it was just kind of like a perfect storm that my other project was on hold, the other guy's project was on hold. So we got back. Eric Hoover was our original drummer. Tim Dolan, we call him the Mothman. He formed the band with me. Our bass player from back then, Peter Shaun Kinney. We added Charlie Francipane on guitar, and we recorded this new album after I put out one message on Facebook saying, "Hey, would anybody care if we re-recorded these demos?" And I get a message from Underground Power Records in Germany saying, "I'm a fan. I've got your demos, and if you want to do a new record, I'll put it out." And we had to go. We didn't know that our music made it all around the world. We knew there was a tape trading underground, but we didn't know that, and found out that there was a demand for it. So we said, "Okay, let's take the best material from the old days." We started writing some new stuff, but figured we'd keep that for the next album. And we said, let's just perfect those demos, re-record them, and hire good people to make everything sound right, and sequence the songs in a way that we thought made sense, and
Cool.
paired it with the right artwork, and then we had the album that you just held up.
Yeah, and that's so cool. It's so great that was the catalyst that kind of launched all of that. The fact that, I mean, I guess it's kind of twofold. It's Eric, and then also this book, and the interest that people had. As I remember reading about Emissary, I don't remember what, like in some zine back in the day. And then it was kind of wondering, like, whatever happened to that band? What, I don't, I never saw anything. I would hear about you, like people talking about shows and things like that. So I'm not too far removed from where you are. And then, yeah, to see, and I don't remember how I found out about the new album. I don't recall exactly. I think probably Facebook or just somebody had posted it somewhere, and I'm like, wait, what? Emissary? And I'm like, wait, is this
I remember
the
that
real
name.
Emissary? Is this really Emissary? And they're like, oh my God, it is really Emissary. Like, this is great.
Well, that's awesome that we're the Emissary, because there are a few other bands that have had the name.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that most of the time if in our world of metal, if somebody says Emissary, they're referencing us. I think that when someone goes, like what you said, wait, the real Emissary?
Yeah.
So we had to put the original Emissary on a lot of the social media stuff, because you go and just search out Emissary, and you're gonna find a whole bunch of different bands that lasted maybe for a little while and had that name.
Yeah.
And so just to make a distinction on Bandcamp, it's the original Emissary, .bandcamp.com. That's the same way with our Instagram, is the original Emissary.
Yeah. One thing that struck me, because as you said, these are basically, you took all these old demos, these songs that you wrote back in you were probably a teenager, early 20s, so in the late 80s, early 90s, these songs you wrote. And what I found so striking, I mean, they're great songs just in themselves, but what I found really striking was the material, the lyrics, the themes are so apropos to what's happening in our world today. Like, specifically, you look at like a song like Chemical Hatred, and you look at what's happening with the pharmaceutical industry in America
right
now, which was happening then, but I mean, now it's very prevalent, especially with the opioid crisis that we're facing across the country. And it's like, wow, this really speaks to what is happening in this day and age. It's like, wow, which is, it's very prophetic to think that, wow, you wrote this 30 years ago, and
sure,
it's speaking to what's happening now in 2023. It's fascinating and I would say that with a lot of the songs. you know, in terms of, we won't get into it, but in terms of kind of, you know, socio-political things that are happening in this country right now, and
Sure.
the
No,
subtext.
and I don't mind touching on that a little bit and saying that um, they're saying bad stuff is bad is is kind of a general theme with a lot of the Emissary material. I wrote the lyrics, many of them around 80, 89. So I had a little garage band called Emissary in Vegas. That's where I came up with the drew the logo, this
Oh
logo,
yeah. Oh yes. Cool.
and wrote a lot of these lyrics. But that band didn't really do much. It was kind of a band before the band. So when Tim and I met, and we put this band together, put together the real Emissary, what everybody knows as Emissary. I just reused the logo and the lyrics, but it was what you're hearing almost always in the music. Tim was responsible for the riffs, of coming up with the original idea of the riffs, and then I just put my lyrics and vocal melodies over them, and they just happened to work. It was one of those things that when we met, it was, I say it's peanut butter and jelly. We kind of come from two different worlds a little bit with our influences, but there was just enough overlap that when we put this thing together, and then the other guys, uh, add something, the bass and drums, add a little bit something and alter things just a little bit to make it sound like Emissary. And as far as the subject matter goes, from back then, I wasn't even conscious of. Clearly, I didn't know that 30 years later that anybody would be listening or paying attention to these songs, that anybody would ever even hear them outside of playing a few local shows or whatever.
Right.
So going back and revisiting some of that, I was conscious this time. I changed lyrics here and there, but not because I was editing to like, oh, I better not say that because I don't want to make these people mad or these people mad or whatever. Just more like using a better word that maybe flows a little bit better. Because I try to stay vague. I try to stay away from talking too much about what the lyrics mean. And this is the same thing with Silent Storm. People are like, what's that about? It's like, well, what do you want it to be about? I don't want to ruin your idea, Victor. I don't want to ruin your idea about chemical hatred. If I told you, no, that's not what I had in mind at all, or whatever, you
Right.
go, oh man, that's totally how I heard it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So you want the listener to kind of define what it's about. I mean, as far as the specifics.
Where, and maybe this is a silly question, but I was curious, with some of these lyrics, some of these songs that are so old, were there any of these songs where you looked back, like, okay, we're going to re-record these songs, let's go back, you're looking at the lyrics and, I mean, yeah, your 18-year-old self that wrote these, now, you're in your 50s and you're looking at it going, what the hell was I talking about? Like, what does this mean? Like, I mean, they're great lyrics, they're very metal, cool lyrics, but were there any where you're like, I have no idea what I was talking about here. I don't understand what I was trying to say with this song.
Not with the ones that went on the album,
Okay.
but there was some other things. There's been lyrics that I've found in an old folder, or somebody was like, hey, remember these lyrics? You wrote them on the back of my, I don't know, whatever. And a friend from high school or something send me a screenshot of some lyrics that I wrote on a piece of paper that they found, from 1990. And you go like, yeah, this is a bunch of ideas together that are just attached by metal sounding words. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it's funny because the Bunnyman, you asked this because I never said this, but I'm gonna sort of out myself on something. Silent treatment isn't really I wasn't environmentally conscious. Sorry, when I was writing that, but that first lyric of the opening lyric, the sphere in which you call your home is dying day by day.
Yeah.
It sounds like, oh, he's going to be singing about pollution and stuff, and that's not really what the song is about. I think a lot of that was, whatever I was listening to at that time, if it was Annihilator or Sacred Reich or Metallica or Megadeth or whatever, and I got an idea for a song, maybe there'd be one line that was in my head, and I write that line down, and then whatever came to me next, I just streamline beginning to end and not even edit. You know what I mean? Like just sing exactly verbatim what I wrote. And this time around, yeah, I did sort of examine things, and go, I could phrase that better, or maybe use a different word there, just to maybe try to make a point a little more clear. And the only thing that was really written new for the Wretched Masquerade was that went on the album was Hypochondriac, because that was like kind of a half-finished song from back in the day.
Okay.
And when we got back together, I told the guys, it's the first thing we got to do is finish that unfinished song. Cool. and put Hypochondriac on the record. It just so happens it was during the pandemic, and I was kind of inspired by some of that, what was going on during that time. I don't think that it's I think there's some stuff in those lyrics that are timeless, but if you sort of know, if you were living through the pandemic, there's going to be some lyrics in there that you're going to be like, I understand exactly what he means.
Okay.
I was there. I know what that felt like.
Yeah. Cool. That's cool. Now you mentioned, and I don't know if you're at liberty to speak about this much at all, but you mentioned that there are songs that you guys have written for the next albums. So that's a very good sign. That's very good news to know that there is a follow-up album coming out at some point. Mm-hmm. Are you at liberty to talk about those songs at all, or kind of what?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, great. So
yes,
what do you have?
Well, so what ended up on the Wretched Masquerade was kind of the best material from the old days, but it wasn't all the material. As you know, you've got some of the demos. There's songs on there that didn't get reworked yet.
Yeah.
There's, so we've still got another album's worth of material of old stuff that we think is strong enough that, we should take a look at that and try to figure out how we can make that the best it can be. And then we started writing some newer stuff. I have a few lyrics that were left over from when I was writing at the end of Sylent Storm, that I could use for Emissary material, and I write lyrics all the time.
Cool. And
Tim's always coming up with riffs. And the other day, Charlie, our other guitar player, wrote music entirely for a song from beginning to end and gave it to us finished and said, here's something I wrote, and listened to it and was like, wow, it doesn't sound exactly like something that would have been on the Wretched Masquerade, but it's still, we can hear how it could sound like Emissary. And I like to use Metallica as an example and say, you and I are both about the same age, so I don't know if you remember like when Metallica came out or when you got exposed to them, but at the time Kill 'Em All came out, that was their whole sound. Yeah. That was everything that they had. Metallica sounds like this, that album. But then Ride Lightning comes out and they put some stuff on there that didn't sound like it belonged on Ride the Lightning. Fade to Black doesn't sound like it would have belonged on Ride the Lightning, nor does For Whom the Bell Tolls. So there was material on there, or Escape. So there's about half of Ride the Lightning sounds like it could have been on Kill 'Em All, and then the other half of it is stuff that sounds like, wow, it's like they added something new to their sound and made, now Metallica sounds like this. Like it grew a little bit, it blossomed. We're going to be doing that on this next record, where there's going to be some stuff that definitely sounds like, yep, that's Emissary. And then there's going to be some moments where we do little things that you're going to go, oh, that was interesting, that was different, that wasn't something that I recognized from the first album. You know what I mean? I think bands kind of have to grow a little bit like that.
Yeah, that's really exciting news. I'm very much looking forward to the next album. That's going to be cool. Yeah, and I like you mentioned, that those demos are great. It's so cool to hear that stuff. And it'll be really interesting to see some of those songs, as was with Wretched Masquerade, it'll be interesting to see some of those songs that were not on that album being reworked and grown a little bit more. I'm excited to hear what you guys come up with. That's really cool.
Cool, thank you.
That's really cool.
At the time, we didn't know what kind of metal we were making. Like there wasn't a million subgenres.
Yeah.
So we used the term power metal back then because Pantera had an album called Power Metal. So we're talking pre, you know what I mean? Like, I guess post glam Terra, but pre Tough Guy Pantera, that record Power Metal that came out, and Metallica had Power Metal on their business card. And I remember seeing the fanzines, anything where they talked about a band like, say, Metal Church. We get compared a lot to Metal Church stylistically.
I can see that.
Yeah, and I think that anything that sounds sort of like that, where it's almost thrash, it's got elements of thrash, but it's a little more melodic and a little bit more somewhere between power metal and thrash, or traditional heavy metal and thrash, would just be called power metal. So we keep saying we're a US power metal band, but it's I don't think we sound like Jag Panzer.
No, no,
You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah, you definitely have a very unique sound, and yeah, like you said, I think it's yeah, it's somewhere between thrash and yeah, traditional heavy metal, and yeah, you definitely have some elements of thrash metal, and I would say, particularly when if you know, for those watching it, look up, you know, YouTube videos of you guys playing live, where yeah, it's a little more aggressive. I think, you know, the live music oftentimes is, you know, sometimes a little more aggressive anyway,
Sure.
sometimes a little faster, and but yeah, there's definitely some thrash elements that come out, I think, especially in some of the riffing. It at least from what I've seen online.
Yeah, like I said, Tim's responsible for a lot of this music. The Mothman, and his big influence when we formed the band was Death Angel, specifically the album Act 3. For
Oh,
him,
okay.
that was kind of like it was the Black Album. It was
Yeah,
it was them going, hey, we can do something a little bit less
yeah,
uh I don't want to say monotonous, but it doesn't have to be fast, fast, fast all the time. And that was a big inspiration for a lot of the music that was written for Emissary that ended up on the Wretched Masquerade. So it was rooted in thrash, but we're not guys that want to play back up, 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 back up,
right.
like every single song. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, nice. Okay. Um, so take me back in time. Let's go in the Wayback Machine.
Mhm.
How did you originally get involved in music? What was the catalyst for you? What was the impetus for you to be a vocalist?
I always had music playing in my house. My folks listened to music a lot, but I mean, it was things like, again, I'm 51, so if those out there, try to imagine, it's the 70s, I mean, and I got older siblings, so I had access to some slightly cooler music, but I mean, I was hearing country and western, and I was hearing um, oldies a lot, and there were certain things that I just picked out that I liked. I really like that. I really like this element of this, and I wanted to listen to music. Probably when other kids were whatever playing with their GI Joes, I was I was listening to 8 tracks. I just liked music,
Cool.
and I don't think that I had the desire to want to do music until probably the 80s rolled around, and had decided I was a heavy metal guy. I was exposed to metal at the time. People don't call it metal now, but I mean, Van Halen and AC/DC and the Scorpions and things like that.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning of the 80s, I was 12 years old, and I liked heavy metal. That's you'd see a festival and be like, they call it heavy metal day, but they would have like Triumph and bands
Right.
that clearly aren't metal, on because it was more like hard rock day.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it'd be like Judas Priest headlining. I don't think anybody would argue that Judas Priest is a metal band. I think everybody knows Judas Priest is a metal band.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I became a metalhead, I think that was when I started writing lyrics, and I got a little keyboard for Christmas or something, or a birthday, like just a little Casio thing or whatever. And I
Yeah.
started working out vocal melodies and never took any lessons or whatever. I just kind of figured out what sounded good. And I was writing kind of guitar parts with my left hand, going bump, 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 bump. And I was writing vocal melodies with my right hand. So I was writing piano parts that really in my mind were the parts that I wanted to apply um, to turning it into metal.
Hmm.
And goofed around with some friends in a few basements, just making noise, screaming into microphones or whatever. And then I wanted to. I feel like I'm a drummer. I'm a drummer first. I'm a drummer that sings. I'm not really a singer.
Okay.
And people will go, but you are. It's like, right, I'm a front man and I'm a performer, but I'm not really a singer. I only sing because I have to deliver these lyrics. My voice is just a tool. It's I'm not focused on trying to become the next Ronnie James Dio or whatever. I'm I don't I don't try to be the absolute best vocalist that I can. I do try to write the best songs that I can though.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of a songwriter first, I guess, and drums are sort of my first instrument. And I play a little bit of guitar. I can make up riffs good enough to show them to the real guitar players in the band and go, here, this is kind of how it goes. And they play it like a guitarist would play it.
Well, and you were the original drummer of Emissary, correct? Like initially, you drummed for the band, right?
I did. So the band in Vegas, yeah, I was the drummer and the lead singer. And then when Tim and I met, we had a drummer, we had Eric, and Eric left the band, and I moved to drums, and then Tim took over about half of the lead vocals. So on those early demos, about half of those lead vocals that you're hearing are actually Tim Dolan singing lead vocals and me playing drums.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I did not know that. That's fascinating. Yep. I thought I wondered because I knew, just in having done some reading about you, and I knew that you drummed for a significant amount of time, up until what, like 96 or so, I guess.
Yeah, that's when the band, when Emissary kind of split the first time. So like I said, so after Tim and I met, formed the band, the first year and a half, I'm the front man. I'm just singing, and Eric's on drums. Eric left the band to join a band that was making more money, and he was able to spend the rest of his life on playing cruise ships and casinos and make a living playing music. It's so we, of course, more power to you. We're playing in the living room. We're trying to make it happen. But when he left, then instead of getting a drummer, I moved to drums and still sang about half of the material. But since I'm in the back of the stage now, I'm on the drum set. People don't want to look back and watch the drummer singing lead vocals. It's just something that I learned that people it's uncomfortable for them. They want the guys that are standing closer to them to be singing the lead vocals. They don't want to have to struggle to look at the back of the stage in the shadows to watch the drummer sing lead vocals all night. I mean, the drummer can sing a song here and there, but there's not that many lead vocal drummers.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of a few. Yeah. Dan Beeler from Exciter.
Yeah, Exciter. Yeah.
Can you think of anyone else?
Not really. Yeah, not that sings all that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there are people. Like Night Ranger. The drummer sang a few songs, but yeah, like sure. Yeah, nobody that is the lead vocalist. Yeah, except for Exciter is the that came to mind immediately. So,
and I love playing drums. And I was playing drums for another band just a couple of years ago. Started getting some issues with my forearms, some issues where I couldn't play as frequently and as hard as I would like. Some pain issues. So that was Sylent Storm. I play drums on the first EP.
Oh, okay.
I'm lead vocals and drums on that first EP, and then when I reformed the band and we did the album The Fire Never Dies, I was the front man. So yeah, I kind of bounce back and forth between drums and vocals, but from now on, yeah, I think that I'm pretty much just a front man from now on.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So 96 was when Emissary basically kind of split up, and and it was a timing thing. Of course, that was such a weird time, I think, for metal. Those mid to late 90s were probably difficult, especially in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, with the whole grunge movement and the alternative rock music movement. And so I would assume that's kind of why you guys kind of split up. It was probably, I would imagine, difficult to book things and
we were kind of right at the tail end of when metal bands were still getting signed and getting booked. By the time we broke up, it was so difficult to get gigs that we could get gigs, but they would put us on a bill with bands that sounded like Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins or whatever was the cool thing that was happening at the time. And when venues booked a metal show, they wouldn't even call it a metal show. Heavy metal became a curse word. Yeah. They would say aggressive rock show because they didn't want anybody to go, oh, stinky heavy metal. Yuck. There's going to be guys playing pointy guitars and doing solos and singing about dragons or whatever the stereotype was. Yeah. The everything that grunge didn't, take on. And I remember seeing an interview with I'm not sure I'm going to say his name right. Kim Thayil.
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
guitar player from Soundgarden.
Soundgarden. Yeah.
And when they got interviewed, they said, "Oh, what what did you guys have in mind when you formed the band?" And he said, "Well, we wanted to actually sound heavy. We wanted to sound like heavy metal because the stuff that was on MTV didn't sound like heavy metal to us." He said, and he used White Lion as the example. He
Oh,
said,
okay.
that sounds like the Partridge Family with fuzzy guitars. And that's so infuriating to me because he's right that
Yeah.
heavy metal kind of had turned into sort of like pop music with a little bit of distortion on the guitar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was a lot of that, a lot of the hairband stuff. And I love a lot of that stuff. But it is sort of like boy band with with Motley Crue guitars or
Yeah.
whatever. So what I understand why grunge had to happen. There needed to be, okay, we got to be the opposite of this other stuff. All
Yeah.
the flashy stuff, we're gonna do. We're gonna not be flashy in all these other areas and it be all gritty and authentic and real. And I understand the appeal. I don't like it. It's not. I'm just never a fan of that music, but I totally get why it needed to happen for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it was for us. There was nowhere left to go. We either had to. There's nowhere left to run. Like in the Silent String lyric.
Yeah.
Uh, it was either stop or we had to turn into one of those bands.
Right.
And we started to incorporating modern elements. One of the songs we had the telephone voice, like where it sounds like it's over the phone.
Oh, right.
And then we were doing the start stop riffs, like the stuff like Helmet and bands like that were doing. And there were parts that sounded like a little bit like Tool and a little bit like White Zombie. And I was doing the stuttered kick drum patterns, the da 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 da, bringing in groove, just trying to see if we could keep going as a band. And those songs that we wrote at the end of the band, they didn't really feel like Emissary. At the time, they were fun, but you listen back to them now and you go like, wow, what were we even thinking? Like it didn't even feel like the same band that we started 3 years earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And so you guys split up, at that point. But you stayed in the industry. You continued to work in the music industry, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What were you doing? And I know a little bit about, we've talked about this before, but yeah, you did some pretty fascinating things, as far as you owned a record store and you also did some well, I'll let you tell it. You did some pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, so I mean I was already writing for fanzines and things like that. At the time that wasn't a big deal. You could write to a fanzine and say, "Hey, I want to send you record reviews," and they'd send you free copies of an album when it comes out, and it's like, okay, write a paragraph on it and mail it back to us or whatever. There was little things like that. Writing for local music columns in newspapers and things like that. But I started working at a record store that was a record store / guitar shop in early '93 before Emissary, before I even met Tim and we put this band together. It's actually where we met.
Okay.
He came into the record shop where I was working, said he was forming a band, and I said, hey, I've done some lyrics and been in a band before and sing a little bit, and had the band logo from, and that was, how this all kind of got started. But yeah, so I was working in retail for 20 years, in music retail. I started promoting shows, had an all ages music venue for years.
Oh, cool.
And bands would come through town, and I'm just like the hookup in this area where I live it's 5 hours to Portland or 5 hours to San Francisco. So we're the place along Interstate 5. The bands will stop off halfway through. So we were getting some okay named acts. So it seemed to make sense to start trying to put shows together. And I was just so hungry for the experience. And I love metal so much. It's like, yeah, any band coming through town, I'll pair you up with similar bands and put a show together, and bands would end up staying at my house. This is probably 10 years ago. I'm thinking I booked Cauldron and Enforcer on their first US tour, and they slept at my house. Unleash the Archers has been through town, probably slept at my house a handful of times. I mean, so much that they know my wife's cooking.
Nice.
You just start becoming friends with these guys. Night Demon, whatever, bands, smaller bands that that grew into bigger bands. But I'm talking, this is probably 10 years ago. So long before that, I was writing for fanzines and doing record reviews and interviewing bands and doing a lot of kind of like what you and I are doing now.
Cool. Very
Yeah.
cool.
So I'm trying to remember back. Wow, what are all the things that I've done? I've hosted video shows like, on cable access. Like,
Oh, wow.
I did radio. I did radio for 10 years. I was a radio DJ. Was on a local metal radio show, like a major market
Cool.
metal radio show. So every Friday night or Saturday night, they would switch it through the years. It was, everybody would listen to KZZE, Southern Oregon's real rock, and on this weekend night they would have the Edge Mob, and the show was called The Edge, and we would play spin CDs, and we would pit new artists against each other and have people call in and vote which one they like more, and win swag and signed things and free CDs, and there was this relationship with other metalheads that you can, if you're booking shows, or you don't have to be in front of the camera on the stage. Right. I just wanted to, when metal was kind of dying out through the 90s, I wanted to stay in contact with heavy metal, the style, kind of like as a relationship or whatever. Right. So I kept writing for fanzines and doing all that behind the scenes stuff until the new wave of traditional heavy metal came back around, and I saw some opportunity of like, hey, I've been waiting a long time to be able to do the stuff that I like doing, dress the way I dress and wear the gauntlets and all the stuff that would have been mocked 15 years ago. And now it's come back around, and there's young people that are into what I grew up with.
Yeah.
The first time I saw bands, I would book bands that I was like, wow, these guys, they're 20-year-old kids, and they sound like they came out in 1987. And they walk in and they've got bangs, haircut, like long hair and bangs, and they're playing Flying V's, and they've got the big white high tops, and this, like, they're even dressing like 1987 Megadeth or whatever. They walk in, and these are kids that weren't even alive when Cliff Burton died. Like, they don't have that shared experience, but they love it. And I was like, wow, okay, so there's a whole new generation of young people that are basically doing the music that I want to do. So hopefully I'm still young enough to take part in this. And that was kind of the idea with getting Sylent Storm together. And then when that, as I said, when that was going away, it just seemed like the right time to put Emissary together.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is. And yeah, as you mentioned, it's interesting that you brought up, the kind of this younger generation of metal heads that kind of, it's a little weird sometimes, going to shows and you see these kids that, like, oh my God, he dressed like I did when I was 17. Like, it's cool, but it's kind of mind blowing to see that. And yeah, I've seen, footage, on YouTube of Emissary playing, and there are young people in the crowd singing along and banging their heads, and like, that's so cool. It's so great that they've caught that bug too.
Yeah, I always felt kind of, I don't want to say ripped off, but I'm going to say ripped off. I felt ripped off that I graduated high school in 1990, and I wasn't able to really, buy my own gear and join bands and do all of that at a younger age. By the time I was doing any of that, I was auditioning for bands in 90, and the underground was already starting to feel like, yeah, I'm over this metal thing. This was like when I was living in Reno and Vegas. I got scarves on my mic stand. I'm, dressed up in the garb. I'm totally, worshiping. At the time, it was like Skid Row, had like same hair and all this kind of thing. And people were like, yeah, it's a little too 80s or whatever. They wanted vocalists that sang, like the Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots kind of way. So I felt like I was like, I almost got to do, I almost got to participate in metal in the early days. And then it was shoved so far underground. You had to just, you had to try to stay active to even pay attention to anything that was coming out. Because most of the big bands were losing their record deals. They weren't playing, Iron Maiden was on CMC.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's major label bands were becoming independent bands, arena bands were becoming club bands. And if you just were just starting out and hadn't gotten all the way there yet, you know what I mean? It felt like, damn it, I feel ripped off. Like I never
Yeah.
got to do it. So I had to sit on the sidelines for almost 3 decades, waiting for it to completely die off to where nothing sounded anything like the 80s. And then suddenly about a decade ago, new young bands started coming out, and bands like I don't know, White Wizard, and he's like,
Yeah.
whoa, this sounds like it came out of 1985, 6, 7. These are 20 guys in their 20s that have a collection of new wave of British heavy metal 7-inch
Yeah.
vinyl.
Yeah.
Uh, and they really love it, and they're making music that sounds authentic to the time period, and that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's like you mentioned Unleash the Archers, and that's another one I would say, that they're a fairly young band. I mean, they've been around for a little while now, but yeah, the first time I heard them, which was probably their first EP when that came out, what, about 10 years ago or less? I can't even think how long ago. But yeah, what struck me was like it had, yeah, this kind of Dio-esque vibe to it. I'm like, oh wow, this is epic 80s metal again. Like, this is cool to hear this. It's cool to, and especially from a young band, like, wow, this is interesting to see that this is circled back around. I'm grateful for that. And grateful for
Yeah,
bands like Emissary, bands that didn't get the chance they deserved at the time, and now you can do something, which is cool, and very exciting. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you on the road in the not too distant future, and hopefully coming my way.
yeah, we want to hit everywhere. The States. We'd love to go overseas. We're
Cool.
we're looking into trying to figure some of that stuff out too. Because we see bands going over and playing big cool festivals overseas, and we're always being told like, oh man, you do really well over in this place here or this place. You'd be kind of surprised, maybe you wouldn't. When I look at the YouTube metrics of how many people in which country are clicking on our videos, like we had no idea that we were going to be so much more popular in Brazil than in, say, England, or
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like we're bigger. South America seems to
Yeah.
really be into us. We get a lot of press in Brazil and Peru and Portugal, and
Yeah, I know South America, Central and South America, they love metal. Like, it seems like anytime I talk to metal bands that had toured down there, they're like, they're fanatical about metal. It's great. And it seems, yeah, same with, I think I could see, and maybe I'm wrong, I could see, like, also it seems like yeah, kind of Central Europe, like Germany and the Netherlands. It seems like your band would be really big there too. It seems like that would be a good spot for you guys.
well, those are places in the world where they didn't have grunge.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's like that. If you think about grunge and alt rock kind of as a whole, you think of that kind of as an American movement.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever heard any band from Germany that sounded like Limp Bizkit.
Right.
So I mean, maybe there is, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but I th- I think that it went away so much in America, but it just didn't go away like that in overseas places overseas. A lot of the 80s bands still had record deals in the
Yeah.
90s, but their record only came out in Japan or whatever. You always hear that big in Japan. Like
Yeah.
Night Ranger was still able to go over and play arenas in Japan when everyone here had written them off as like, yeah,
Right.
like I'm over that. I'm over
Yeah.
that 80s band.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's like, yeah, that's interesting. You said, I was talking to John J.C. Cupers, the singer of Praying Mantis, and yeah, he said Japan, it's insane. He goes, yeah, I'm like, it's like in his own country of the Netherlands, he's, he gets recognized occasionally on the street, but there's no screaming fans. But he says in Japan, he's like, I have screaming fans. Like, they make stuff for me. They wait at the hotel and scream and yell, and he's like, it's bizarre. Like, I never expected that. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I had some friends play Vakken a few years ago, and they had that experience where they people at the hotel knew who they were, and they were getting interviewed for much bigger magazines, German magazines, than what they were doing in the States and
Mhm.
how the culture is totally different. I interviewed, let me see, Lee Aaron. You know who Lee Aaron is?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
A few years ago, and she said that when she was the biggest back in the day, she felt like she couldn't get arrested in her own hometown. Like nobody knew who she was.
Wow.
She never got recognized in, where she lives in Canada. But then she'd go and tour with Bon Jovi overseas and do like 2 weeks overseas, and they were just as big as Bon Jovi in certain countries, or right behind them or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you fly home and you're like, okay, now I'm back in the town where I live and nobody knows who I am.
Yeah,
It's really bizarre.
yeah, that's got to be strange. Really strange. I would, yeah. Do you think, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, this is just kind of, just philosophizing a bit, I guess. Do you think we'll ever see the type of metal popularity that we saw in the 80s again in America? Do you think that'll ever happen again?
You mean okay, so again, when I talk about metal, I talk about hard rock like it's metal
Mhm.
because at the time it was called metal. Anything they would play on Headbangers Ball.
Yeah.
So we're talking, Whitesnake and stuff too, right? So
Right.
around 87, 88, all of the hair bands came around and that sort of took over MTV and it was everywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're ever gonna have that again. Like the Sunset Strip scene,
Yeah.
that's never gonna, I don't think that's ever gonna happen. Um, it could, but I think it probably would have. About every 20 years, things kind of come back around. And I've been waiting. And you see bands like Crash Diet come around, and they're from Sweden, I think,
Yeah, I think
maybe
so.
Norway or Sweden, and they kind of seem like an LA Guns kind of a band or whatever. You'll see little pockets, little things pop up. You like, oh, this kind of reminds me of these little bands, but what it was like when it was just overwhelming, heavy metal was everywhere, hard rock and heavy metal in the late 80s. I don't think that'll ever happen again. And I don't blame people for getting sick of it because yeah, it got to the point where it was like there wasn't anything new after you've heard the third and fourth and fifth version of the Motley Crues and the Warrants, and it's just another group of bands. It's just five different dudes with the same hairdo and the same clothes, writing the same songs, and they're all interchangeable. It gets to
Yeah.
the point where it's like, okay, I'm bored of this.
Right. Right.
But thrash and that kind of thing, I think it's kind of sort of stayed at least popular in the underground, and people don't like to hear about how Pantera waved the flag during the 90s and kept kept metal in the mainstream, but uh, it definitely changed styles,
Yeah.
visually and how it sounded, but metal as a category has kind of always, it never completely went away.
Right. Right.
What do you think? Do you think we're gonna have a
Yeah.
renaissance?
Uh, I mean, I think we're somewhat in one now, but not to the same degree. I mean, especially you look back in those days, and it became so mainstream that, I mean, even the jocks were listening to metal, the cheerleaders were listening to metal, like everybody was listening to metal. But now it's kind of a pocket, so more. But I think it's globally, it's probably maybe even bigger than it ever was globally, I think. And especially because of the internet and because of social media, and which is cool to see, these, like, the fact that you're popular in Peru, that probably would not have happened in 1988 as
I
easily.
Yeah, I don't know how we would have even gotten our music over there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now the internet's good for that.
Yeah.
Put
Yeah.
out a video and anybody that has this thing called the internet can click on it and they can hear you, and I can connect with a kid in Peru. Like
Yeah.
right now, if I post something and push post, and half an hour later a kid in Peru is listening to it and messaging. We get these little messages on the videos, hails from whatever,
Right.
Estonia, or places that I have to look up on maps and go like, where is that?
Yeah, that's cool. That's a cool thing. Well, and I think too, it's with the internet and with social media and whatnot, there's also just so much music out there now, and the fact can be a little overwhelming, but at the same time, I love to see that, you know, you mentioned you and your bandmates all have home studios, and there's a lot of people that have home studios, and there's a lot of people don't have to rely on these big giant record companies anymore to produce music, like quality music, and get it out there, which I think is a good thing, you know, because you can, you know, globally you can see, you know, I have bands, you know, from all over the world. You know, I have CDs and vinyl from all over the world of bands, you know, like I never would have been able to get a hold of that back then.
Yeah,
You know,
it
or it
kind
would
of
have
levels
cost
the
me a
playing field
fortune.
too.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, to where like the underground bands don't like they can sound almost as good as the biggest band, you know, with some free software.
yeah,
You
right.
know, and it used to be if you were this far underground, you sounded like you were that far underground. It
Yeah,
was really difficult and took a lot of money to get you into a big fancy recording studio to get the parts down and have it mixed and mastered right. And you know, there's a lot goes into even releasing a 7-inch single. You know,
yeah,
from beginning to end. It's not like it just happens overnight. You know.
right, right.
So yeah, there's a lot more music coming out, but I think there's a lot of bands that 20 years ago would have sounded like they were a lot further down than the most popular artist, and they sound like they're actually a little bit closer, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely,
Because
definitely.
there's plugins and all this stuff that you can do to make yourself sound better. You know, auto tune for vocals, and you can quantize the drums, and you can go in with all this technology and fix everything and sparkle it all up. And some kid in his bedroom that played all of the parts himself.
Right.
It'll sound like a full band, and it'll sound like something would have come out on a major label.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, it's like this guy. Yep, I made that in my bedroom.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's incredible, that technology. And sometimes, you know, sometimes a little troubling, maybe, you know, in terms of, you know, if you're a purist. But at the same time, it's cool that there are musicians that probably never would have been able to get any sort of recognition or exposure. But yeah, as you know, with that kind of technology that you mentioned, it's, you know, it's cool that, you know, somebody can record an album in their bedroom, literally. That's amazing.
Yeah, the
um
only thing is it's now you've got stuff coming out so frequently that people don't pay attention to everything for as long as they used to.
yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean? That's it, like, oh, this is my favorite album of the year, and a week later you've completely forgotten about it because you've been you've you've seen 100 other albums come out.
yeah. And sometimes
So
the same band or musician, I mean, they're, you know, some of these, you know, there's some of these musicians that are so prolific in terms of releasing stuff. I think that's a good point that you bring up, is that, you know, I remember as a kid, it seemed like such a big deal when an album was going to come, like, oh, Metallica has a new album coming out like in a couple months, you know, and it was this big thing, you know, because it would take, you know,
right,
they put crank out albums. It was every few years, you know, every couple of years, you know, so you wouldn't see anything for a while. And now, I mean, you look at, you know, say like somebody like Devin Townsend, who I can't keep up with the amount of stuff he produces. It's mind blowing. Like, I'd be broke if I tried to buy everything he puts out. It's
sure.
every few months. It's like, good Lord, dude, calm down. You know, it's like, you know, the Frank Zappa of modern music, you know, it's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
well, it's incentivized anymore. You know, like
yeah,
if you release a song every 6 weeks, people will keep paying attention to you. So if you don't release a record for a couple of years, it's a lot. It's a long time
yeah,
for somebody to forget about. Oh yeah, I remember I liked that band a couple of years ago when they did their last album.
yeah.
So that's why we're talking about the next thing that we're doing is probably going to be a single or an EP, just something to hold people over with some new material
Gotcha.
until a full length album is until a full length album is ready. And again, I use all these Metallica examples, but something that people don't seem to remember is after Kill 'Em All, Metallica had 3 EPs before Ride the Lightning came out.
Hmm.
Whiplash, um, Jump in the Fire, and Creeping Death.
That's right.
So it was album, then it was EP, 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 and then another album.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like that was our thinking was, you know what, between full length albums, maybe we could drop a 2-song single or a 3-song EP or something, just something to hold people over. Like I said, and until we have another entire album ready for people.
That's a good idea. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
You,
And then,
you oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, yeah, and as I was had said before, the new material has hints of our sound from the first album, and there's going to be some, maybe not huge surprises, but some things I think that will maybe raise some eyebrows, go like, oh, that
Cool.
was cool. That I didn't see that coming. Whatever, just little vocal things or things in the production or how things are shaped.
Nice. I love that. Have you, and maybe you're not at liberty to discuss this, but have you decided on what tracks you're going to release on an EP at this point, or is it too early in the game right now?
We've decided on a couple of them, and then there's a couple that we're juggling, like which one. So ones that we have decided that we're doing, we have a song called The Crystal Witch.
Hmm.
And again, I try not uh to sort of spoil the fun of figuring out what a song is about, but when you hear a song like Master of Puppets, and I don't know, the first time I heard that, I didn't know what he was singing about until you catch that line about chop your breakfast on a mirror,
Yeah.
and you realize, oh, he's singing about cocaine. Wait, he is the cocaine. He's like, I will occupy, I will help you die. Like, you know. So this song called "The Crystal Witch" it's got some narrative that's something like that.
Okay.
There's sort of like a double meaning in that song, and then we have a song called "Beyond the Dark." That is the song I was telling you that Charlie wrote the music to, and
Okay.
and gave it to us, and we made some suggestions like, hey, could we switch this chord to this or whatever? And he said he was pretty married to how he put it together and didn't really want to make too many changes. He said, I'm usually open to tweaking some things, but I'm pretty proud of this one. I like how it turned out. And I would like us to do this song exactly how it goes. We are gonna switch some things up and add some little accents on the guitar and maybe change up the drum beats.
Hmm.
But he gave us a demo that was pretty much a completed song, just with no lyrics or vocal melody, and I had to write to that.
Okay.
And that's Beyond the Dark. We've got another song called Death Perception that we've been working on. It's not absolutely complete yet, and then we've been toying with the idea of maybe doing a cover tune.
Oh, cool.
For Sylent Storm EP, we did an Omen song called The Axeman.
Oh yeah, great song.
And thank you for the choice there. Thank you for
No,
thanks
no, I mean
for
your version
I
is
chose it
awesome too.
myself.
No, you're very, I mean both. Yeah, it's a great song. Omen, I love Omen, but yeah, your cover is very cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it fit. I think it fit the
Yeah.
EP. And the one thing that people don't think about though is you got to pay. You got to pay the artist that wrote that. And now in the world of you'll get demonetized if you put up a cover tune and you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I got demonetized for a video where we did a Metallica cover live.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
that's right.
and it's one of those things where it doesn't get taken off of the channel. You can still watch it, but they don't run that little ad at the beginning where we get paid for that little 0.001% of that commercial that's run. They just
Right.
won't run a commercial on that. So they're like, okay, that can exist on your channel, but you can't make money from it.
Gotcha.
So there's some hoops you got to jump through if you're going to do a cover tune, because you got to pay the original artist, or whoever owns the tune needs to get paid. So you gotta go through kind of a mountain of paperwork. It's probably not as bad now, because this is a few years ago since we did the Sylent Storm thing. It's probably just go to a website and click a couple buttons and go like, okay, yeah, and license this, and
Yeah.
make sure the publishing goes here. And so uh so yeah, that was just an idea we were toying with. We didn't have a song picked out. We're just like,
Oh, okay. I
there's
was about to
probably
ask.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was wondering if
there's
you had something.
no. I would like to do something. If we did that, do something maybe not as well known. You know how when Metallica did, man, they're getting a lot of plugs from me in this interview. I'm sorry, but when they did "Am I Evil,"
Yeah.
how many people really think of "Am I Evil" as a Diamond Head song? I see you got Diamond Head behind you
Yeah,
there.
I love Diamond Head.
But back in the day, I'm telling you,
Oh yeah,
like,
nobody knew who they were,
no, uh,
especially in the States.
yeah, it's so there's many people that think of "Am I Evil" as a Metallica song,
Yeah.
because they did the version that, you know, that got into the ears of the metalheads. It might be kind of cool to do something that was already cool, but maybe didn't get. Sorry, I muted you there for a second.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that didn't get a lot of exposure. There's so much metal out there, so many songs that I love, you know, from the 80s that I listen to. I'm like, man, I would love to do this song. But you got to pick something out that also fits with the other Emissary material that sounds like a song that they would do. You know, something that's where I can sing in my comfortable vocal range, and maybe even try to put our own spin on it or whatever, rather than just doing an exact copy.
Mm.
Which, I mean, with all due respect to, you know, the former members of Sylent Storm, when we did the Axeman, we were pretty much doing an exact replica of the Omen song, and I got permission to do it from Kenny Powell himself, who, you know,
nice.
guitar player for Omen, who wrote that song. I had interviewed him for a fanzine and said that we were thinking of doing that, and he says, "Oh, I'd be honored for you to do that." I didn't know that. Yeah, I took that as like, cool, we're gonna put it on our album, and then when we go to turn it into the record label, they were like, you know, you realize you have to pay for that song, you know, because basically, right? Yeah, it's like, well, it's I didn't know, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah,
I was a
I
new
wouldn't have known
to that. Yeah, so but and with that song, I didn't feel like it needed anything updated. Am I Evil isn't much different.
No.
I mean, James's voice sounds different.
Yeah, it's a little
but
faster,
really how it's done, they didn't add anything. I mean, you know what I mean? They just did it as Metallica.
Yeah.
But it's basically, you listen to the old version, you're like, wow, it's pretty much exactly the same song. All the parts are the same, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, with it, when it comes to covers, it's you don't want to just slap anything on there. You want to do something that's appropriate, that fits.
Yeah.
If you're gonna put it on your album. Maybe we can do like a thing where Judas Priest, like where they took what was it, Joan Baez?
Oh yeah.
Diamonds and Rust.
Diamonds and Rust. Love that version too. It's so good.
Yeah, totally different though.
Yeah, very different song.
Way different vibe. Like you wouldn't even, if you heard the original, I don't think anybody would go, you know, this would be awesome if somebody did a heavy metal version of this song.
Right. Yeah. It was like Hendrix with All Along the Watchtower, you know, Bob Dylan, you know, very different vibe. And I mean, there's different ways to approach it, I suppose. Are there any, and maybe you don't want to talk about it at this point, are there any specifics that you're kind of leaning towards that you would really like to do? Or
what do you mean? Like for
a specific song that you're like, oh, I'd really like to do that song. Like, or at this point,
as far as cover tunes go?
Yeah.
There's been a couple I brought up that that I thought would sort of fit with our vibe. We have done a couple covers live just to sort of fill in space, you know, and it's a crowd pleaser thing. You know that it's a win when you go into, when people hear the beginning of For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Yeah.
Metalheads are going to cheer because they're like, I know that song. You know what I mean? There's been a few that slightly, I don't know, maybe not that level of popularity songs that I've thought of. I thought about Medusa by Anthrax.
Oh yeah, great song.
Which is that's the Anthrax era that I like the most.
Yeah,
and that was one I thought of, but Joey sings pretty dang high. Like he's a tenor. I'm like a high baritone. So it's like where my break is, you know, it's not super comfortable for me to sing in that range for that long. You know, that sort of that lover boy range, you know what I mean? Like it's sort of like this, the strong upper chest voice, stay in there for too long. I kind of have to drop out of it a little bit, you know, and I can do little spots of that, but I'm not a young man anymore. That one, and then I thought about Electric Crown by Testament was maybe another one, because that's from The Ritual, which is sort of their Black album.
Yeah,
that's the record where they kind of pulled back and they weren't doing stuff that was a million miles an hour through the entire record. Got it a little bit more melodic, a little bit more mainstream sounding, but I think that material's, you know, that's good material.
Yeah,
a lot of those bands did that. Thrash bands that started out really fast did their sort of commercial record. I love Cryptic Writings. by
Oh
Megadeth.
yeah, yeah, it's a great album.
My favorite song by Megadeth of all time is She-Wolf. People will
Oh,
go, blasphemy. How is it not Skull Beneath the Skin or whatever? Wake Up Dead or that material's cool too. But for me,
She Wolf. It's a cool song.
She-Wolf,
Very
so
cool
good.
song.
It's got all the parts that I like.
Yeah, that is a very cool song. Nice. Oh, great. Um, well, Jim, this has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you this evening and an honor, really. For those watching, if you do not own the Wretched Masquerade, shame on you. Go get it right now. Go to Bandcamp. And if you go
We've
to
got a few
Bandcamp,
left.
yeah, and you'll get some cool demos too that you can download there as well. If you look in the description below this interview, there's links to Emissary's pages, so check those out. You will not be sorry. It's such a great band. So Jim, thank you so much, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you on the road in the not too distant future, and excited for new music coming out from you guys as well.
Yeah, we got some announcements that are going to be coming out pretty soon about some live dates for 2023 that we're just not allowed to talk about just yet, but they'll be announced shortly.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview.